strange term. Rashi talks about it. We'll get back to it. And it was when they traveled from the east. They found a valley, Be'eretz Shinor, in the land of Shinor, and they lived there. And one man said to his fellow, Hava nilbena levanim, come, let's make bricks, and we'll make a big fire. And the brick was for them for stone. Just a moment. And the chemor was for them for chomer. I don't know how we translate that. There are two different types of building materials that you use to hold the bricks together. One is mortar, one is cement or something. Well, they use one of them is a more natural substance, and one of them is an artificial substance. So they use the artificial substance. And they said, let's build ourselves a city, umigdol, and a tower. And its top will be in the heavens. And let's make ourselves a name. Pen nafutz al pnei ha'adamah, lest we will be dispersed over the surface of the entire earth. Over the surface of the entire earth. Vayired Hashem liros here, and Hashem descended to see the city, v'esamigdol in the tower, asher banu bnei ha'adam, that the people built. Vayomer Hashem, and Hashem said, Hein am echod, behold, they are one people, v'safo achas l'chulam, and they all have one language. V'zeh achilam lasos, and this is what they began to do. And now, lo yibatzir mehem kol asher yazmu lasos, aren't we going to withhold from them all that they're intending to do? Hava nerdav v'navlo sham sfosam. Let us go down and let us confuse their language. Asher lo yishma'u ish sfas re'ehu, so that one man will not understand the language of his fellow man. Vayofetz Hashem osam misham, Hashem dispersed them from there al pnei chol ha'aretz, over the surface of the entire earth. Vayafdalu livnos ha'ir, and they stopped building the city. Al kain karoshma Bavel, that's why the name of this place is Bavel. Kisham balal Hashem sfas kol ha'aretz, because that's where Hashem mixed up the language of the entire earth. Umisham hafitzam Hashem al pnei kol ha'aretz, and from there Hashem dispersed them over the face of the entire earth. There are many questions in Pshat that we can ask about this parsha. Let's limit ourselves to discussion of a few of them, and we'll take them in order. Okay, let me repeat a point that I made briefly while I was reading it. Let's look at Pasuk Gimel again. Vayamru ish el reyehu, and one man said to his fellow man, Hava nil benol levanim, come, let's make bricks, make a big fire to bake the bricks. V'atilam levinah la'oven, and they used the levinah for the brick for stone. V'hachemar haya lahem lachomer, and they used chemar, the adhesive material, for what people normally use chomer for. Okay. Now, that's the Balei Tosfos. We have many of their Pirushim and Chumash, and the last 25 years people have been collating them, putting them out in nice volumes. They're readily accessible. So, they make the point that in Babel, Shinar, where these people lived, the most basic material that you use for construction is stone. But in Babel they don't have stones. So they had to make bricks, which you make out of baking clay, mud, water, okay? So Leveno is a kind of artificial building material. It's artificial evan. And he said, by the same token, the normal building material you use to stick the bricks together is chomer, which is a kind of mud. Right? But the mud in Babel doesn't stick the bricks together. So they had to add something. I think they added limestone or something, and they made chemar, which is the kind of artificial building material you use when you don't have the natural chomer. Okay, fine. The question that we have to ask at this point is, so what? Why is it so important for the Torah to teach us what building materials the people in Shinar used to build their tower, and to point out that they were not the most natural building materials. Okay, what's the significance of this? And to make the question a bit stronger, let me read to you a Rashi and Eov, a Rashi based in the Medrash. Here, Eov is bemoaning his suffering. Horani lechomer. He says, Hashem compared me. That's not the only interpretation of the word, but for our purposes, that's the interpretation we're going with. Hashem compared me lachomer, to mud, mortar, whatever it is, this building material that we talk about in our pasuk. Vo'es mashel ke'afor ve'efer. Yet I was likened to dust and ash. Part of Eov's lament. So Rashi brings down the Medrash Tanchuma. Horani lechomer, Hashem considered me like Chomer. Hashem considered me as bad as the Dor HaPalaga who sinned with Chomer. Although I was comparable to Afor ve'efer, although I was a tzaddik in the same league as Afor ve'efer, Avram Avinu, who said about himself, I am Afor ve'efer, dust and ash. Okay, so Eov says, it looks like it's not fair. Here Hashem is treating me like the Dor HaPalaga, when in fact I'm closer to Avram Avinu than the Dor HaPalaga. But how did he label the Dor HaPalaga? Chomer. Let me read to you the Rashi. V'hu danani karishe Dor HaPalaga. Hashem judged me like the Rishoyim of the Dor HaPalaga, shekasuv bahem, about whom it is written, v'hachemor hayam hayalahem lachomer. They used the chemor instead of chomer. So here, when Eov wants to refer to the Dor HaPalaga, he finds no better term to use to describe them as chomer, the mortar people. I mean, like as if this was, Hashem views me so bad, I'm like the people of chomer. Like, you should mention there's sin there, shouldn't you? Right? But sin, who cares what building material you use? But to Eov, this was the essential feature of the Dor HaPalaga. Okay. Next question. Back to Perek Yud Aleph in Noach. So the people said, let's make ourselves bricks and let's make ourselves chomer. Vayomru pasuk daled, and they said, Hava nivne lanu ir umidol. Come, let's build a city and a tower. First, in pasuk Gimel, they said, let's make bricks. And in pasuk daled, they said, let's make a tower. There's something wrong there. If you didn't decide that you're going to make a tower or a city, what are you making bricks for? When they said, let's make bricks, they had not yet decided they were going to make a city and a tower. So what are you making bricks for? It should have been, let's build a city. Okay, let's get the bricks. Next question. So Kadosh Baruch Hu's response, he says, okay, we're going to let them get away with this? No. Pasuk Zayin, Hava nerda, come, let us go down, v'navla sham sfasam, and we will mix up their language. So I just translated the pasuk the way Rashi translates. Look at the Rashi there in pasuk Zayin, v'navla v'unevalbel. That means let us confuse. And he says, the nun mishamish b'loshen rabim. The nun is not part of the shoresh. It indicates the plural. The hey achroni yaseira, and the last hey is extra kehei shel nerda, like the extra hey in the preceding word nerda. Okay, so Rashi is saying that this is an irregular verb form. There's a hey there. The nun indicates the plural. We will confuse. And the hey, just some kind of poetic form. It normally wouldn't appear there. Okay.
At what stage in the tower building is this happening?
Before they finish. That's all we can conclude.
Oh.
Okay. But, so it's a problematic word. Right? It's a word that demands explanation. It doesn't fit your normal verb constructions. So one of the Bali Tosfos has a different take on that word. He says, no, the nun doesn't indicate the plural. The nun makes it a nifal, a passive verb. According to this Bali Tosfos, the way you translate the pasuk would be, Hava nirda, come let us go down, v'nav lasham sfosam, and their language will become mixed up. The nun makes it a passive verb. So the question we can ask there is, not only is it not normal writing style to shift from the active voice to the passive voice for no good reason, it's also not the style of Tanakh. I can bring you a raya from Rashi and Shmuel, where Rashi asks a kasha there, where he doesn't ask a kasha, but he explains why a pasuk shifts from the active voice to the passive voice. Right? It's not something that's not standard. So here also we can ask that question. Come, let us go down, active, and you'd expect, like Rashi does in fact here, explain the next verb to be active, and let us mix up their language. But according to the Bali Tosfos, no. Come, let us go down, and their language will become mixed up. Why the shift from the active to the passive? Finally, look at Pasuk Tes. Al Kain Kara Shema Bavel. That's why he called its name Bavel. Kisham Balal Hashem Sfas Kol Haaretz, because there Hashem mixed up the language of the entire earth. Omisham Hafitzam Hashem Al Panei Kol Haaretz, and from there Hashem dispersed them over the face of the entire earth. So the Bali Tosfos find two remazim to bris milah in this pasuk. Let's see. Kisham Bolal Hashem. Look at the last letters of those four words. Yud, Mem, Lamed, He. All you have to do is switch around the Mem and the Yud, and you've got the word Milah there. Okay? So one of the Bali Tosfos says, this alludes to the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reserved Lashon HaKodesh for the nation that practices Milah. Okay. Then, but that's not all. Then, let's see. Hafitzam Hashem al Panei. From there, Hashem dispersed them over the surface. Mem Hafitzam Hashem Mem Hey al Lamed Panei Yud. The letters of Milah you got there again. Okay? So the Bali Tosfos say this is an allusion to the fact that Hashem is going to disperse the nation that practices Milah. It's an allusion to Am Yisrael's Golus. So the questions are, okay, that's, it's interesting there that you've got that spelling of Milah there twice in the pasuk, but why over here? First question, why is it dafka the fact that Am Yisrael practices Milah? Out of all the different mitzvahs that Am Yisrael does, it's the fact that we practice Milah that makes us worthy of being the people of Lashon HaKodesh. Question number one. And question number two, why in this pasuk about Migdal Bavel does HaKadosh Baruch Hu, does the Torah allude to the future Golus of Am Yisrael? Okay, those are the questions we're going to deal with. Okay. So, let us consider first what the people in Bavel here did wrong when they built the tower. You read the pasuk, and you read the psukim, and yet what's wrong with what they did isn't absolutely clear. You see, Hashem was upset with it, but what's the aveira here? Well, one thing is clear, that whatever the aveira was, it had to do with language. Right? The pasuk begins, the whole earth was of one language and unified words, And what's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's response to what they were doing? We're going to mix up the language. Okay, so the Aveira had to do with language. What were they doing wrong with language? What's wrong with having the same language and unified words? Okay, let's talk about language. Language preceded creation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the universe through speech. Ba'asara ma'amaros nivru ha'olam. The world was created with 10 statements. Language is the basic tool of creation. Okay? And that's true with human beings also. The highest type of creativity that a Jew can engage in is creating in the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Okay? Expressing your uniqueness, your understanding in the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Language is the instrument of creation, the basic instrument of creation. Now, language is composed of words, and words are composed of letters. There are 22 letters in the Aleph base and 5 final letters. There's a Kabbalistic sefer called the Sefer HaYetzirah. We spoke about it a little bit on Monday night. It discusses the 22 letters of the Aleph base, and it views the letters of the Aleph base as the basic elements of creation. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world with language, and if language is composed of words, which themselves are composed of letters, then anything that is created comes from a particular combination of letters spoken, in a manner of speaking, by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Sefer HaYetzirah discusses the alphabet. What characterizes Aleph? What characterizes Beis? And so on and so forth. So, let me suggest the following. When the Pasuk says that the entire earth was of one language and they had unified words, what that is pointing at is that the people of that generation, the generation of the Dor HaPalga, had a very deep understanding of creation. They understood, they saw how everything that exists in the material world, probably in the spiritual world as well, is a combination of the letters of the alphabet. You know, we believe in what the Sefer Yetzirah tells us. It makes sense. You know, Hashem created through language, so on some level, the 22 letters are the 22 elements of creation. Yeah, for us it's a matter of amunah, right? We don't understand how this object here is a combination of Samach, Pei, and Resh. All right, that doesn't, but we can believe it if we don't understand it. They understood it. They saw what makes Lashon HaKodesh Lashon HaKodesh. What is so holy about it? What makes it divine? Okay? So they viewed reality on a very elemental, fundamental level. Now, what happens when people view reality on a very elemental level? Let's go away from the Aleph base for a moment and talk about the people who we are more familiar with, who study reality on an elemental level. Scientists, right? Scientists see how the physical, chemical, biological laws by which the material world functions. Right? They take the reality that we view superficially and they break it down to its components and see how these components merge to form reality as we experience it. Now, when you study the world scientifically, it can have one of two results. The Netziv, in his introduction to his Parish on Chumash, talks about what a wonderful tool the understanding of nature can be to be mechazik your emunas Hashem. If you approach it from with the right intention, the beauty of creation, the wonder of creation, the symmetry, the interdependence of everything in the universe points towards a unity, and it can really be mechazik your emunah, it can even be the basis of your emunah. Halavai, that will be true of everybody who studies science, right? You have an opposite tendency. Science explains a lot. It makes a lot of sense out of things that seem to be random, things that seem to be, not part of any system. You start looking at it scientifically, and it all makes sense, right? Science takes a lot of data, and it makes a system out of it, and explains a lot. Scientists, therefore, have the tendency to think that because science explains so much, you take that little step and you go overboard, and you begin to say it explains everything. Everything can be quantified. Everything can be explained in terms of scientific laws. You get this materialistic approach where, since science does explain a lot, but only in the material realm, right? And so your ability to explain so much in the material realm begins to give you the conception that that's really all that exists. That's everything, right? And you begin to say that even a being as spiritual as man, everything that we do can be explained in terms of stimulus and response, and all of our thoughts, all of our feelings, you can reduce it all to chemical reactions and electrical charges and things like that. Yeah, you can take science and go overboard with what you can explain through science. I'll suggest that the Dor HaPalaga made a similar error. Before the modern age, before people began to really develop the scientific outlook, the idea of atheism was virtually unknown. Things don't make sense, and they are here, so there has to be something greater that puts it up. Once you can delude yourself into thinking that everything makes sense without a spiritual side, then you can begin to delude yourself into atheism, right? The people in the Dor HaPalaga, they had this universe in front of them. And they were very, very great scientists, greater than the scientists we have nowadays. They didn't work with oxygen and carbon and nitrogen and everything like that. No. They saw the really basic elements of creation. When they saw this object right here, you look at it, this is what happens when you combine samach with pei with resh. It all made sense to them. They took the entire reality that they experienced. It's a system. It's obvious. It's a much clearer system than what we see right now, that the most insightful of scientists sees right now. Right? So they didn't go so far as to say there is no God, chas v'shalom. They weren't atheists. But they began to develop this idea that Hashem created a system which we see it is whole in and of itself. Right? He put it there. But now that it's there, he doesn't interact. This is an independent system. Right? It's there, it's all by itself. HaKadosh Baruch Hu withdrew, he's doing whatever he does, who knows. Okay? Then they asked themselves the question, well, all right, this universe, as we think of it, is here. And it's just here all by itself now. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu withdrew. Who's in charge now? What's supposed to happen now? Are things supposed to stay just as they are? Or are things supposed to develop? Maybe things are supposed to develop. Maybe this is one stage in an evolution. Okay, let's say it's supposed to develop. Who's going to take the world to the next stage? Kadosh Baruch Hu, he pulled out. He gave us a something complete. He's not interacting. We don't need him in the system. The system makes sense even without him. So if it's meant to go further, who's going to take it there? Only us. If not human beings, what? There's no havamina of anything else, right? Do we have that ability? Are we the new gods, so to speak? Are we the new creators? Can we create? Can we make something new? Let's see. Let's see. Here we are in Bavel. We don't have stones. We don't have mortar. Can we make something as good? Let's see if we have the creative capacity. So the first thing they did, before they made any projects, let's see if we can make bricks. Let's see if we can make chaymar instead of chomer. And it worked. We are creators too. We're creators too. Okay? Now, what's the next stage of the universe going to look like? What kind of world are we going to make? So they had to make these plans. Okay, we're going to make a city and a tower, whatever that means. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you people are deluding yourselves. This is not what I gave you brains and creativity for. You know, the Meforshim here, you look in the Orach Chaim, look at Rabbeinu Bachye, they describe the sin of the Dor HaPalaga using the term that the Gemara uses with regard to Elisha ben Avuya, but they borrow that term and they say that the Dor HaPalaga they were kotzatsu binetios. They were cutting off the plants at the roots. Right? They took something that is connected, that there are roots connecting the plant to the earth. Right? But through their conception of things, they viewed the plant as being cut off from the roots. They viewed the world as they saw it, as they understood it on the basis of their clarity, with their understanding of the Safa Achas and Devarim Achadim. They understood that the world was independent. They cut off the plants at the roots. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu couldn't tolerate this. So yes, let me explain one more point. Devarim Achadim, unified words. What does that mean? I'm not saying this is the only pshat. There's one thing that characterizes the world of science is objectivity. If you're not objective, you're not a scientist. You can't say, I feel. Poetry isn't science. Okay? So, objectivity means this is the common ground in which all of us see things alike. It's truth independent of our feelings about it, of our unique perception. It's truth, it's independent truth. Right? Part of what makes something scientifically valid is that anybody can reproduce it. An experiment is a successful experiment if it yields the same results every time. Right? Then you've shown something constant, something objective, an objective truth about the universe. So, part of the attitude of the Dor HaPalaga was that they were completely objective, at least they thought they were. Just as H2O means the same thing to a Jewish scientist and a Goyish scientist and a Chinese scientist and a Russian scientist, right? It's something, it's not what I feel by H2O. It's a formula. It's a metzius, right? They thought that's all of reality they experienced that way. Devarim achadim, their words were unified. When I talk about an abstract concept like, let's take justice, we all, we can use justice and we can have meaningful communication when I talk about an abstraction like that, but take it a step deeper, each of us has a different conception of something abstract. Right? On a deep level, we'll talk about this more during the year, even when I talk about something concrete, like book, right? When I'm not looking at it, when you and I are thinking of book, we have different images in our minds. Even we're always subjective, right? But the Dor HaPalaga told themselves, they were convinced that they weren't subjective at all. When I say Sefer, and you say Sefer, and I think Sefer, and you say Sefer, we are thinking of the identical combination of Samach, Pei, and Reish. That's Devarim Achadim. We're objective. We all think the same way. Right? So Kodesh Baruch Hu said these people have let their creativity go wild. What they think that they are in control, they think they see and understand everything, and therefore they think they are independent. We cannot let this go on. Okay? How are we going to teach them the lesson that they have to learn? Well, Kodesh Baruch Hu says these people think that they're completely objective. They have a full grasp of reality. Right? Let me shatter that illusion. How am I going to shatter that illusion? Come, let us descend. When a Kodesh Baruch Hu descends, like he did on Har Sinai, right? That means he makes his presence felt in a more intense way than he normally does. Normally, he has to hide himself to the degree that we can fool ourselves if we're so inclined that he's not looking, or even worse, right? If he was always in a state of Yerida, like he was on Har Sinai, life would not be a challenge. Okay? So, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, these people think they can grasp the totality of everything around them. I'll show them it's wrong. I am going to intensify my presence on earth. And if there's one thing a person cannot delude himself into thinking that he grasps in its totality, it's a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Right? The Kodesh Baruch Hu says, you think you understand what I am? Come, spell me. Tell me what letters can encapsulate me. Come, spell me. Right? Everybody, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu descended, realized that they don't understand everything. They understand their facet of the truth. I can grasp something about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but that I can apprehend the totality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Forget it. That I grasp HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the same way that you do? Forget it. Forget it. He's the ultimate abstraction in a certain way. Right? If we don't understand something like charity identically, we don't understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu identically. Right? We can't even fool ourselves with that. So what happened then? They started speaking different languages. It was a traumatic experience. Something happened to their minds. Till then, they were all so close together that they all spoke the same way. They had this experience. Their minds were confronted with something that could not possibly be objectified, and it left its imprint. They became more subjective than they were before. And they started speaking differently. And one man could not understand the words of his fellow man. And all of what I'm telling you here is alluded to, I'll grant remotely, but alluded to in a Rashi in Sefer Habakkuk. Habakkuk Perek Gimel Pasuk Vov. The Navi is talking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He gives a couple of Rashi brings down a couple of perushim in the pasuk. No, excuse me. This is the only perush Rashi gives. Omad, he stood vayamoded oretz, and he measured out the earth. That means, according to Rashi, Hashem stood and punished the earth measure for measure in the Mabul. Ro'ah, he saw the earth at the time of the Dor HaPalagah, says Rashi. Vayater goyim, and he made the nations jump. And Rashi says, don't ask me why the pasuk expresses it this way, but Rashi says that means he made them speak different languages at the time of the Dor HaPalagah. Vayispotzatsu harei ad, and the eternal mountains exploded. Shachu givos olam, the eternal hills sunk. Halichos olam lo, the ways of the world, or the eternal ways, maybe the ways of the world is better. The ways of the world were his. I'll read you the Rashi on Halichos olam lo. Remember, this is what Hashem is doing to the Dor HaPalagah. Halichos olam lo, the ways of the world were his. Herolahem shekol mahalcho shel olam shelo hu. He showed them that the entire course that the world goes in is his. That means they thought that the course that the world goes in is not his. The lesson of the Dor HaPalaga to the people in the Dor HaPalaga was Hashgacha Pratis. This world isn't just there all by itself. The Kodesh Baruch Hu is there. Halichos Olam Lo. He's there with you all the time, and don't forget it. Okay? Now, we have two allusions to Bris Milah at the end of this parsha. Right? Let me read the psukim again.
That's why there goes the pollution theory.
I don't know that one.
That man in the last century is destroying the world because of air pollution.
What does this have to do with it?
How apparently we don't have a saying how we can't destroy the world.
Oh, yeah, we can't destroy it, but we can ruin things. Okay, so it's not that pollution is not an issue. Okay, Al Kain Koroshim Bavel. That's why he called his name Bavel. Kisham Bolal Hashem Sfas Kol Haaretz. That's where Hashem mixed up the language of the entire earth. And the first remez to Milah Sham Bolal Hashem. Ki Sham Bolal Hashem. The last letters spell Milah, and the Balitos will say this alludes to the fact that Hashem reserved the holy language for those who practice Bris Milah. And I'm asking, why Bris Milah? Why? What's that? Well, on a certain level, it makes a lot of sense. Because the holy language is the language of creation. Right? One of the messages of Bris Milah, clearly, is, the Bris Milah is done on the creative order in the most material sense. Right? It's part of subjugating our power of creativity to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? We are creative beings. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu we are the only beings to whom HaKadosh Baruch Hu granted the ability to create. But the message of Milah is, know your limitations. Sanctify your creativity. So for those people who know their limits, who will not make the mistake of the Dor HaPalaga, you can have Lashon HaKodesh. That's the best language. That's the language of creation. That's reserved for you. You deserve it. Other people, can't let them have it. Look what they did to us. Okay? And then, Umisham hafitzam Hashem al panei kol haaretz. From there, Hashem dispersed them over the face of the entire earth. Hafitzam Hashem al panei. Last letters spell Milah. This alludes to the Golus of Am Yisrael. What's Golus doing here? Let me throw out one possibility. And that is that it was in the Golus, and this isn't a coincidence, things like this don't happen by coincidence. The greatest creative achievement of Am Yisrael, the greatest achievement in the Torah Sheval Peh, is the Talmud Bavli. Bavel, right here, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for whatever reasons, set it up that we express our greatest, as a nation, we express our greatest creativity in the Golus, at least at a certain stage of the Golus. Right? So, and I will add another point, which I'm just going to touch on a tiny bit here, and we'll talk about it at length later in the year, and that is, there is a subjective element to learning. Right? They're learning, there's certain things have to fit, things have to make sense, they have to form a coherent whole, but at the end of the day, you and I are not going to agree on everything. We're lucky if we agree on anything. Right? The Gemara has a machlokas. How often does the Gemara arrive at a conclusion? In other words, what to me is a coherent whole isn't the same as to you. What makes sense and what, it's geschmack, it has the ring of truth to me, to you, you've got 10 kashas on it. So in learning, there is a subjective element. Right? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that this subjective element that became clear at the time of when he went down at the Migdal Babel and confused the languages, that will be put to its greatest application in the greatest creation in the Jewish people, the Talmud Bavli, which will be created in their dispersion. Have a good Shabbos, everybody.
So why after they made bricks, they decided to
Because then they convince themselves we can create our own elements. We can make a new